Okay, so I think I foreshadowed this before, but we ran this workshop process in a number of local councils. You saw the list before. There's some people here today that might be kind enough to give some of their reactions in a second. But the aim of the project was to increase the awareness of issues related to ageing population, but we very much focused around that goal of getting local government personnel thinking about an ageing population in practical terms. And by this we mean right across local government, including elected representatives. The process was to collect and analyse the checklist we'd mentioned before, a call for expressions of interest from councils through the LGSA. We developed a workshop process, and we've completed all the workshops, and we're revising at the moment in progress, and someone asked the question before, which will be available early next year, a resource for use by other councils. And very much we want to give you a little bit of a flavour of what we've found so far, but to try and get some feedback about what would be most useful for you in terms of a resource. One of the great opportunities when you're an academic is actually to come to workshops like this. We don't get out all that much. We usually stuck in the ivory tower teaching the kiddos or doing our research. So, you know, we love feedback, and I've even had some at morning tea, which I really appreciate. So please feel free to get stuck in it shortly. Okay, so checklists. We're a little bit down on checklists. There's a lot of checklists. No one seems to be using them all that much, which is a bit of a shame because I spent a lot of my life writing checklists, but that's okay. I'm still young enough to begin a new career. But we found analysis from the perspective of it was useful, and we talked about these 5 features that I'm going quite quickly because we're a bit pushed for time. The 5 features we talked about before. We then contacted the person at council, went through the venue, the usual excitement about making sure you invite the right people and don't get the mayors mixed up between councils. That's always a problem. COTA organised and paid for a variety of things. So look, including the assistance from me, that's good. And we can write a report. But I want to talk mostly about the workshop. There was 4 parts. Understanding the diversity of older population, which I'm going to talk about first. So we're working in small groups, so it's usually like a little bit of a cafe sort of table format. And the first exercise, we tried to get people to describe the archetypical older person. And to do this, we split the age groups up into those 5 categories. Okay, so we're anxious to get people to think about the different sorts of issues for people at different ages. And I think one of the issues there is people talk about ageing population, the issues and experience and council responsibilities, I guess, around someone 95 are going to look fairly different than someone 55. So we're trying to highlight that. So we had these wonderful stick figures that Jane was a bit of an expert at drawing. And people would get to come and write what they thought for different age groups, what the issues were for that person. One of the exciting things was to look at different names people use to describe older people. So that's an interesting sociological study in itself in terms of what names people used in different council areas. But we've got quite a rich picture of people thinking about what the issues were for older people in their community. And don't forget, on each of the tables we had maybe a council law, a council staff member, someone from, might be a community services group in the community, and then just some older residents. So they were very much having the discussion with some informed people, including, usually people in those age cohorts, describing what's going on for them. So, some outcomes which, if you like, are sort of early soundings from the report, but, very much a focus on people's interest in staying in their own home. They're all considered active, involved in the community, regardless of age. So, there's no stereotype about the person was just, sitting around at home waiting to die. Or reading old university reports. No, they were very much actively engaged with the local community, that could possibly be a way to end your life earlier. But anyway, well, let's keep going. So the common themes are around transport, financial security, access to health services. Okay, so that was exercise 1. Exercise 2, I mean, we did a little bit of talking at the start of the day, but that probably went on for about half an hour, and most of the time was people actively doing things with some debriefing. Each person was given a picture, taken in their local environment. There were shops, streets, buildings and parks. And the person had to look at that photo through the eyes of an older person and describe what they thought were the positive and bad things about it. Now, this is what we call... This is like iPad minus 12. Okay, so we got in early, we thought you'd go to the minus 12, but same sort of process. You're reacting to something in the local environment. They're photos from the local area. So Jane went out in advance of the workshop, took what you thought were interesting photos in that area, and people were commenting on areas that they know, and they got the right things. They got the right things on the photo. Now, one of the things that was interesting about that, other than, and there's a picture of Lane Cove there, one of the things about that was just showing that everyone can be an access advisor. You don't really need, to get the, world's greatest experts. The world's greatest experts are actually the people in your community. And they had very sharp views about, a bit like, Katie's map, about what was green, what was orange, and what was red. And what was interesting, I think, from a researcher's perspective, looking across, we went to workshops across the state. The issues were very similar. Between a town centre in Lane Cove and a small town in Western New South Wales, the issues that people thought were badly designed were, very similar. Okay, the context was different. There was different public transport, maybe traffic issues, but the themes were very strong. And I think one of the interesting things I mentioned before was those discussions about the person in the community describing to the engineer why their pavement doesn't work, even though it meets, the standard, and the engineer thinks it's the world's greatest pavement. Were very sharp views that were common across those areas. And I think that could be a useful part of the resource is some of those, sharp views. There were some very good recommendations that actually happened during the process in that day where people were getting very sharp feedback on their, town centre, for instance, and what actions might actually come out as a part of that. Okay, so... we had lunch, and the engineers, had a more chance to talk to the people over lunch in a sort of informal setting. Then we went in and had a look at council strategic plans, and this is interesting because I get to read a lot of strategic plans from large councils to small councils, and you could almost see the ones that are written by the same firm of consultants. No, just kidding. But there was a lot of variation in those strategic plans, but seriously, there was such an improvement on sort of the piecemeal, 57 different plans that turned up in councils in the old days. As someone that's been teaching planners and interested in the planning process, I think the new process is a wonderful opportunity for everyone in this room that I'm sure you know about. But anyway, we went into the plan. We basically got people to pull a section of the plan out and ask them about what the implications of that part of the plan were for the ageing population and how they could operationalise it, if you like, a little bit like the exercise you were going through before, how they could operationalise it in terms of some particular things that could go into an operational plan around those strategic objectives. So we ended up with a list of possible things council could do. We wanted to focus on the can-do things, the real low-hanging fruit. And, in a lot of areas there was a lot of low-hanging fruit that we could utilise existing budgets that council could get involved with, quite quickly. So a lot of times there were things like just information, if you're trying to do stuff, the ageing population's involved, they've got to know about it. And what are the actual information and communication and engagement strategies around talking to your older residents, for instance. Then, this is the part I love the most because I thought it was a little bit committing people. Like, as someone that spent a lot of time in planning processes, you know what it's like. You have the strategic plan, everyone's at it all day, you write this great plan, and sort of the end of the day you're exhausted. And then, you know, people look at the plan again in about 3 months' time, you know, sometimes even longer. But so what we did in this thing, we actually, people had to reflect, you know, with the people on their table, and then make a pledge. They had to take the pledge. So, you know, the brothers and sisters of all those councils got to make a pledge about something that they were going to do in the next couple of days that was going to actually make a more livable environment for older people in their council area. And seriously, people stepped up to the plate. You know, I was completely blown away, particularly around things like the engineers and even, you know, people like procurement managers, who realised that the real role for them in procuring things like, you know, seats in that they're going to use in public spaces has really got to involve the aging community in terms of design issues or maintenance or a whole range of things about where they put the seats. So we had people taking a pledge saying, okay, something practical that they're going to do as a result of thinking about what the issues were today, that I'd love to go back and check whether people did it. Maybe we'll find out shortly. Maybe we'll find out shortly because we've got some people that, you know, but I think that's a useful process in a planning exercise, and it's certainly, we were trying to highlight, has a lot of practical things people can do that doesn't require a very large, you know, commitment of resources. And it was about attitudes, people realising and increasing their awareness so they could actually do things that to announce their actions to the whole group. So again, hopefully that was a way of committing people because they realised translating learning into action. So very practical ideas and pledges emerge, and hopefully some examples of those will be useful as a resource. So here's an example of one. This is a building fire. I can research a link between public and commercial buildings. You know, so they had to write their pledge down. We collected the pledges, and if anyone out there hasn't done their pledge yet, you'll probably have your water turned off for the rest of your life or something terrible. But who knows? Who knows what happened? The feedback was, you know, reasonably positive. You know, which we thought was obviously good if you're putting that energy into the process. But you know, hopefully what we've done in that one-day workshop is sow the seeds of a you know, longer conversation between the key stakeholders in those communities, and certainly getting people thinking about the issue through you know, some personal learnings. One of the things that probably, you know, in some councils we had better turn up from across councils than others. Some councils, you know, the usual story, there was a crisis, so the particular person couldn't make it on the day, which was a bit unfortunate. But in other council areas, we had very good cross-organisational representation, and I think that was a real opportunity for people in this room. So obviously, we're collating all this output. We're trying to get some feedback about what format's going to be most useful for you. But I guess it might be useful before we get into that, just to invite the people from the councils that are actually participated in the workshop that you know, might like to give their impressions. Obviously, I'm biased because I was helping to organise it. But William, would you mind saying a few words about? And William, Ryde was the first council we went to, so you were the guinea pigs.
So I had the nail-biting task of sort of breaking ground, doing all sorts of things, posters and all sorts of stuff. And I really didn't leave myself enough time, so it was quite a sweat. And we ran it on the last day of February the 29th this year. So after the Christmas break, just before the Christmas break, I was starting to email people kind of fairly desperately, and then I kept on going after Christmas. I think the result of that was, pleasingly, I was quite worried there were going to be 3 people and a dog at the workshop. It was really, you know, the reactions I was getting until very, very close to the day. I hardly got anything back. But I managed to send emails to every person in council. I got told off for it, but nothing's happened since, so I'm fine. But that was a good thing to do. Everybody needs to know, even if they didn't turn up, And some of the excuses were good too. So I knew people who were interested and really couldn't make it for good reason. So those are people I can follow up, and I've got a list of them. And I think that's a very useful thing in itself. And I see this as a process of developing a change in attitude. We're not really at the stage where the attitude's changed yet. But even turning up was a start. And some of those pledges were quite interesting. I think the rates people have come good on those cooperating with our home modification and maintenance service. So I think something happened there. But there were a lot of pledges. And so I think that in itself would be an interesting thing to revisit and see how many people really came good on that. But just the innovative thinking, as Peter said, that went into that was really interesting. So just to sum up, I think a very useful exercise, a groundbreaking exercise, and a big council that has a lot of communication between groups and areas. We succeeded in getting quite a lot of people across council, so all 5 groups of council were represented pretty well, and quite a few members of service providers groups as well. So we had quite a good mixture. The weak area is the councillors.
Yeah.
The mayor came and went.
Yeah, yeah.
And so did the general manager, but we didn't manage to get anybody to really stay and do the day.
Yeah.
As we'd have liked.
No, thanks, William. I might just ask, Nicola from Wingecarribee, yeah? Yeah, would you mind saying a few words about, just here?
Sorry.
Because I noticed some of the networking or, workshopping you did at the end of the day, Nicola, after the process had finished, and maybe you'd like to mention that, because I thought you were really trying to work hard at maximising the outcomes for yourself. But yeah.
For myself, I was very much.
Yeah, yeah.
Our workshop, we had our workshop in May, and it was excellent. And as a part-time staff member at Wingecarribee Shire Council, ageing and disability worker, it's very time limited to do ageing and disability. So to have Peter and Jane come down and do a lot of the hard work, the organising was quite easy for me. So I made use of the councils that went before me, and I had conversations with William and other councils, so I was feeding off them too, and I pinched all the posters that William did and just put my name on them, so that was great. They were which was, things like that can be very time consuming, but when somebody else had started the process, to tap into it without having to reinvent was just extremely helpful, extremely helpful. So we had our workshop. We had a really good turn up for our community. We had just over 40 people, but it was a great mix of council staff, aged service providers and community members. The council staff, I did put the pressure on and went through managers and said, I want at least one representation or one representative from each of the groups, including, some groups that may not have thought themselves, central to this ageing issue, and we got that, and that was great, and they all enjoyed the day very much too. So that was also very positive. I asked a lot of community reps that weren't my usual ones that I ring and ask to come to things. I tried a few different people, and they came and they had a great day, and they've come back and said thank you very much for inviting us. There was some church groups and age providers who don't always come, and just a few different faces in the room than the usual ones that come to council consultations. And so we had about a third of each: service providers, council staff and community members, which made for a good mix around the tables. We're a council that has a high ageing population. I don't know how much we are under Great Lakes, but we were looking at our census stats the other day. We've just got some new programming software about stats, and there's some really quite exceptional ageing pockets within our Wingecarribee Shire that is shocking quite a lot of people, that there are so many older people there. So we had a lot of ageing issues. We had great fun doing all the workshopping, and our old people. We've got some beautiful old people and lovely old people names. I think Valentino was one of our very. He was a star. He was a 75-year-old man that.
he was into living, wasn't he, Valentino?
He was. So the exercises really did get people engaged, but the information that came out of those exercises that Jane and Peter have put together and provided to the councils have just been such a useful resource. Even in the short time that I've had that document, I've already used it to highlight. We had funding grants for the SIPTIGs for the bus and public transport. Well, the examples that Jane had taken pictures of happened to have been 4, I think there might have been 5 really bad public transport bus locations in our area that they were highlighted in the report, and they were the ones that our transportation engineer had already sort of tentatively looked at as well. So just to have that information to back up was just really, really useful. Good data, just information and comments that were useful to use for other purposes. So we've really found that that's great, and the comments on the community strategic plan that came out of the workshop have been really useful for using in other areas. We still do have the problem about sharing across council, but the council staff that came, and as Peter mentioned, at the end of the workshop, we had a bit of a staff debrief about what they'd got out of it and how they'd enjoyed it and what they, how they were going to move forward. And that was really good. It was a bit different. We don't normally do that type of staff debriefing at the end of these things, and it was interesting that we were able to get some good comments from staff. The pledges was quite interesting because I still have people from community service providers ringing me because I'm holder of the information to remind them what their pledges were. And after the exercise, once I got the data back from Jane and Peter, the report back, because I knew the people in the room, I could read through the pledges and I sort of knew who was who because they were anonymous, but I could sort of work them out. So now when they ring me, I can say, yes, I can work out which was your pledge.
That is interesting.
There were some really good things, but there has certainly been some more staff involvement coming to me, asking me questions, involving me in other issues which are happening from council that have come directly from that workshop. So, no, I was very grateful and would love to do it again, even if it came as a suggestion that perhaps having the resources to run it again to collate more information, but perhaps having the app to do the accessibility issues would be wonderful too.
Excellent. We're running a bit short of time, aren't we? So we were going to talk to Ruth, but we might see if she wants to jump in around the resourcing issue. Would that be okay? Yeah, I think one of the things that was different at, like your mayor, I think, came and stayed the course.
And you actually had a meeting with the executives. Jane had a meeting with the executives and the executive staff and the councillors the night before as well.
Right.
And then the mayor stayed, who then isn't the mayor anymore. So the stuff she pledges.
So she said she was going to do it in her next term. That was cutting, wasn't it?
And in some ways, she sat at a table with some of the senior staff, and that probably didn't work real well because she dominated that table. So probably wouldn't do that again. I went back and asked some of the staff that came, they felt that made any difference. Ours was a small group, and it only had staff and service providers. I'd only been there 6 months when this was done, so I didn't know very many of the staff, and it was invitation only, so the executive of our section invited people. So I'm not sure if it would have been different if we had the same as William. So some of the feedback, I went and asked them a month ago, so we had it in May. So some of the staff felt that it definitely heightened their awareness around older people and people with mobility problems, and they felt that maybe it hadn't made immediate changes, but it would in the future. It would change the direction, the way they did things in the future. One of the biggest changes was that council is actually doing a development project for accommodation for older people, and it's just at the strategy doing around the development, really early stages at the moment. Prior to that, they hadn't spoken to the community services division at all. And now there's a whole dialogue. They come over and they ask for what models would there be. They've asked for the productivity commission plan, all sorts of things. They've actually gone and looked at some day services to see. There had been no dialogue before that. And so the comment I got from that was it hadn't necessarily changed the way we're doing our project, but it definitely helped to educate us on the common issues of facing the elderly with regards to contact with the community and mobility issues. The COTA information will be very helpful in the design stage of the project. So that had a huge impact on that. We had one of the senior surveyors came, and he said that he became more aware about the mobility of older people and had implemented that when he's doing assessment of buildings. So even though he's supposed to know about the code, not necessarily did he think about mobility. And for our environmental educator, and she does media as well, she was saying that from now on, whenever she does any information forms for any activity, she includes information about whether or not people have to do any walking, what sort of other information, wayfinding is actually on the forms. And for our strategic planner, said that she had a wonderful time and that it will definitely inform her work in the future.
She was one of my old students, so I told her to say that. But anyway, no, it was nice to see her again. But no, thanks very much. That was a good process going back a fair bit.
Yeah, and one more comment is that I'm not just sure that a tick-off plan would work. I think that the exercise needs to be reviewed because the relationships between the departments have strengthened after that.
Yeah.
Just sitting around and having it and seeing those problems, because
Okay,
we
no,
had
thank
huge
you.
problems.
Thank you very much. That was all useful feedback. I think up to you, Margaret. Thanks very much. Certainly I'm quite easy to find. I'm the only Phibbs in higher education in Australia. Or you can find me at the Urban Research Centre. Google the Urban Research Centre. If people want to have any subsequent conversations about ageing or indeed affordable housing, I'm always happy to talk to people from local government and elsewhere. So thank you.